anyone can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting could be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There is a slight delay between the meeting and the broadcast of around 30 seconds. Webcast officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm?
I confirm the broadcast has commenced.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Partnership Development Group. Before we commence with proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Please let the Chairman know when you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphones when not speaking and consider turning off your video to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you. Presentations, images, or video footage should have been made available to you in advance of the meeting and will be visible on screen. Please indicate in the chat function if there is a problem. When referring to a report, please quote the page and paragraph number. There is no private business for this evening. However, members are reminded that it is their responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access of Information regimes, FOI and EIR, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation, and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, councillors are identified by a prefix of CLR before their name, and the officers in attendance are identified with the prefix of officer. There is a minute taker for this meeting and 2 meeting facilitators. I can confirm that this meeting is quorum. The Partnership Development Groups consist of the following members: Councillors Bohr, Courtauld, Mrs Cunningham, Hensman, McArdle, Mrs Pell, Pritchard, Mrs Sandham, and Thorogood. The officers for this meeting are Emma Wisby, Governance and Members Manager, Jessica Mann, Governance and Member Officer, and my name is Chloe Waite, and I will be the meeting facilitator for this meeting. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Mrs Cunningham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chloe. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start by welcoming you all to this virtual meeting of the Partnership Development Group. My name is Councillor Mrs Cunningham, and I will be chairing this meeting. I'm being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator who will help me identify when people want to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. I obviously can't see all of you, so please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphone when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers for this meeting, I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Chairman, we have no apologies for absence. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. If there are no more apologies, then I will proceed to item 2, declarations of interest. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. Please indicate you wish to speak in the chat function.
Chairman, there is no indications of any declarations of interest for this evening.
Thank you, Emma. As there are no declarations, I will proceed to item 3.
Apologies, Chairman. I believe Councillor Sandham has her hand raised.
Oh, I beg your pardon?
Yeah, my chat says it's disabled. So okay. I don't have any, but just for future, I don't.
I think I can probably identify people I can see everybody. All members have got the cameras on, so I think I can see by hands if there are anybody, if you have a problem with the chat function. Councillor Bohr, I can see, has got his hand up.
Yes, I just wonder whether I should declare as Chairman of Licensing. That's one of the areas mentioned.
Chairman, if I may assist, there's
Yes,
no need for
Chair.
members to declare any interest in relation to any office they may hold by appointment to the authority. I'm aware that we do, the report sets out a number of areas of council responsibilities, but we're not looking to take decisions in respect of any particular subject area tonight. We're exploring the setup and the commencement of the scrutiny review. So at this stage, whilst I appreciate Councillor Bohr has been transparent with his declaration, it's not required for this meeting. Thank you. Chairman.
Councillor Thorogood, did I see you with your hand up?
Yes, yes, thank you. Yeah, my chat function is disabled as well, so I can't.
Right, okay, so I'll keep an eye out for some hands.
Okay,
if you
thank you.
Speak, okay. So we go to agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting.
Apologies, Chairman, for interrupting. Is Mrs. Powell, are you indicating?
Sorry.
Yes, it was just
Sorry.
to say that my chat function is not working either. But it was also the same as Councillor Bohr. I'm unlicensed, but Emma's answered that question, that we don't have to declare it as an interest.
Sorry, Councillor Mrs. Powell, I'm not doing a very good job of looking for the hands. I'll try harder next time. Okay, no, nobody else want to speak at the moment? No, okay, I will move on. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, for this item, I'll be seeking your agreement, therefore silence will be assent. However, if a member wishes to raise an issue in respect of the minutes, please indicate via the chat function. Do any members have any objection to the approval of the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 25th of November 2020? Everything okay with that then? Thank you, members. Your silence is agreement that the minutes are an accurate record.
Chairman, before you take the next item, I have just looked at the settings and just switched back on and off again. So I hope that members now have their chat function. Could Councillor Sandham and Councillor Thorogood just check for me, please?
Yeah, that's on now.
That's lovely, thank you. Unfortunately, it was a glitch on our setting, so I do apologise for that. Members, you have the chat function to use. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you, members. We now proceed to item 4, public question time. Agenda item 4, public question time. Members, there are no registered speakers for this evening's public question time, so I will proceed to item 5. Enforcement procedures at Braintree District Council. Agenda item 5, enforcement procedures at Braintree District Council, introduction to terms of reference and future work programme 2021 to 2022. Members, this report is set out on pages 5 to 18 of your agenda. Please can I ask the governance officers to set out the report?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will take this item, if I may. Members, we've provided you with a report to set out the history as to how the topic for this scrutiny review was selected. I don't propose to go through that. I think that's neatly set out in the reports to understand how this topic came through the expressions of interest and was considered by the scrutiny chairman's group to select the topic and to set some terms of reference. So unless members have got a particular question around that process, I think it's more important to actually focus on the scrutiny review itself, because obviously time is quite a valuable commodity at the time. But if members do have any questions, I'm happy to take that. So the topic of enforcement has been selected for this scrutiny committee, and the fundamental element of enforcement is obviously to be viewed through the lens of partnerships, because obviously that is the remit of this committee. What we have set out in the report is to give members just some knowledge around what enforcement actually means for the authority. If I may just take a step back, if I can ask members to turn to Appendix 1, which set of the report, which is on page 12. This sets out the terms of reference for this scrutiny review. So this would be our key document with regard to the review going forward, and this will be the document that I will bring you back to on each occasion where we are looking to examine an area or look to explore. So the terms of reference were pulled together by the officers who are responsible for scrutiny and presented to the chairman, the scrutiny chairman, for their consideration, and also to get their feedback. So these are your terms of reference for this scrutiny review, and they are focused on looking at the partnership working of enforcement as opposed to the enforcement function itself or into a particular subject. So as you can see, there are 6 points that what we feel could be explored under this subject. So looking at the areas of enforcement which falls to the council as a district authority and whether these are effective. To look at the new enforcement powers that have been provided to the council in light of the regulations coming out of the COVID pandemic in which we all find ourselves. What partnerships does the authority have in place, and how do we use this in order to strengthen enforcement activity? How does the council utilise intelligence it holds or it receives from third parties in order to work with partners to implement enforcement? Under the council's original enforcement powers, what new approaches have been exercised over the last 12 months to strengthen these actions? And then going forward, how can the council improve its relationship with its partners in order to strengthen its enforcement activities? So whilst enforcement is a huge subject and there's huge member interest around enforcement, the focus on this review is looking at how we work with our partners. So towards the end of the presentation, members will be asked to formally approve the terms of reference. But Chairman, could I pause at this moment to see if any members have got any particular questions they want to ask around terms of reference or seek any clarification?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Emma.
So members, if you've got any questions around the terms of reference, if you'd like to pose those now, then I'll do my best to address those. So I take it that members are broadly happy with the terms of reference for the scrutiny review?
Councillor Pell, I believe, has her.
Yes, Madam Chairman. I just want to know in what section of enforcement would somebody that's neglecting their house and causing upset to all the other neighbours, it's a case that I'm actually dealing with live with the authority now. The house is being eaten up by vegetation and flies, rats, all sorts of things. What would that come under?
Well, without getting into any specific issues, that's where we'd look at our enforcement powers with environmental health and possibly our colleagues in building control and health and safety. So it's something that the authority has dealt with historically with our EHO colleagues to sort of take action. And it could also be working with our partners at Essex County Council with adult social care, because there may be some health issues as to why somebody may not be taking care of their home in such a way. So whilst not sort of going into details, there is a partnership working element within the environmental health functions of the organisation, where we'd work with partners to potentially resolve those issues or to look at the wider issues with individuals who find themselves in those circumstances.
And did I see another hand up? Councillor Courtauld, I thought I did. Please. No, you are muted, Councillor Courtauld.
Very proud putting my hand up automatically. Could I ask Emma a question about the new restrictions, please?
Yes, certainly.
Emma, am I right in thinking the restrictions now, any new restrictions now last till July? Is that right?
Well, that is actually getting outside the purpose of this meeting today, but that is my understanding of some of the restrictions. Obviously, I don't want to get into conversation around the COVID restriction. The reference to COVID in the terms of reference is looking at the powers the authority has to take enforcement action where there's been findings of breaches of regulations and the safeguardings that have been put in place. So
they're unlikely to be changed or withdrawn before we've finished our...
I couldn't say for any certainty, but at the moment, as this scrutiny commences, those regulations are live enforcement powers available to the authority to take, should it be necessary to do so. So if we find with our scrutiny review that the situation with the COVID regulations alters because the situation with the pandemic changes, then we will reflect on that, because the scrutiny review will record what you've examined at that time. And with all scrutiny reviews, we always hope we've got second recommendations to the executive, the cabinet, for possible improvements or comments for things to take in consideration. So just because a situation moves on in the life of a scrutiny review, that doesn't mean that research or that work is lost. It's always recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy with the terms of reference, I think. I just wanted to sort of bring home the note that is made underneath, which refers to the time pressures that we probably have on our officers. I was actually amazed how much time they're able to give to these things, given how much they've got on their plates, particularly the last review that we undertook in this group. And I'm just concerned that we don't drag them in for lengthy sessions or unnecessarily. So I think I think we should bear that in mind as members as we progress this one. But in terms of the terms of reference itself, I think they're fine.
Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. Would anybody else like? Councillor Hensman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also broadly happy with the terms of reference. I'm just wondering, in terms of partnership and how we work with other partnerships, there are mechanisms. Emma can probably help me with where she lives. There's like a zone which makes enforcement much easier, which we could suggest we could put into a certain area, and then that carries like I'm not sure, is it a bylaw or something?
A bylaw is an enforcement tool. So one of the things that you would naturally explore, looking at the terms of reference and some of the information we've already highlighted, is how we work with partnerships. Now, to look at the scrutiny review, one of the things that we are recommending is that you look at certain service areas where enforcement is a tool available. And it may be that one of the areas that you look at would explore whether there is local arrangements in a formalised way, or whether there's an informal arrangement approach to enforcement. So it really does depend on the subject matter which we explore, but certainly there's a variety of arrangements in place and tools available which can cover geographical areas, not just subject areas.
Yeah, I was just trying to think. There's a specific term, some sort of zone. I was told by officers that I think Malden's got one, and it covers pretty much the whole of the town and out promenade and so on. And anything that happens within there, it's very easy. Yeah,
there's certainly in the other districts there are zones which are either put in place under the antisocial behaviour legislation or under the licensing legislation. So yes, those are sort of things that you would explore through the scrutiny reviews but what you're not looking at is whether there's a problem in the district that you're to fix, because you're not here to fix an enforcement problem or a particular enforcement issue. You're exploring the powers, the arrangements, the relationships that enables the authority to take enforcement action.
And what tools we've got, exactly right. So yeah. I'll do my homework and I'll get the exact term I'm looking for.
Yeah. So.
Councillor Ball.
Yes, it was. under the first category, what areas of enforcement fall to the council as the district authority, and are these effective? And think of two instances. The parking partnership is responsible for enforcing parking measures, but in a way we are partners to them, rather than the other way around. Would that be a legitimate area of study or not? And also, there's another one where under licensing we are required to enforce the placing of A-boards, but we have no powers to do so. So a few little anomalies which would be interesting to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I don't know, did Emma, did you want to come back on that, Emma?
Well, certainly the parking partnership is actually referenced within the report as one of our joint committee partnerships that we are a party to. So that is one of the examples we've already given in the report, and it's something that can be explored, because it is actually an example of where we're working under a joint committee arrangement through a legal agreement, and where we're an equal party and we have another authority actually doing the administration for it. So that is something that can be explored under the terms of these reference. We're working with, I think, 4 other authorities as part of the NEP. We have Colchester Borough Council, who's the administrative authority, and their officers discharge the work on the ground with enforcement on behalf of us as a district council, but all for off-street parking, but also for on-street parking with Essex County Council. So that is an example of partnership work, and that can be explored.
Thank you, Emma. I think we'll obviously all agree that enforcement covers a huge area. So what we have, and we can't look at every aspect of it, so we have to perhaps whittle it down to one suggestion is, do we look at the things that actually have the greatest impact on the authority in terms of finance and the cost to the authority? I don't know how members feel on that.
Chairman, if I may, Mrs. Sandham wanted to ask a question.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Jenny. Councillor Sandham.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to ask whether one thing to potentially look at might be whether there are any additional partnerships that would be useful. So I was just thinking, for example, the landscaping team is very small, and could there be partnerships with the Essex Wildlife Trust or someone else to sort of look at stopping hedges and trees being ripped out where they don't need to be on developments, and protecting them before the development goes ahead, so that sort of thing?
That's certainly something that could be explored, because the terms of reference looks at what do we currently do and what we could do going forward in the future to make effective use of our enforcement powers. As you can see from the report, I've set out where we can work in partnership, where we can work in collaboration, or where we work under a statutory framework. So there are things that can be explored. I think what I'm picking up from members, Chairman, is that members are broadly satisfied with the terms of reference for review, and that they're happy that provides flexibility and scope to explore this subject with a view to through the lens of partnership working. So if I may, Chairman, obviously we need to do the formal bit towards the end of the meeting. If I can then sort of go on to the other elements that we've just got set out in the report, if I can, which members have already touched upon through their suggestions when reflecting on the terms of reference, to see how they could work and make sure that they are meaningful. So we have the terms of reference within the report, and we've also set out the timetable of the work for the partnership group in Appendix 3, and we've included that so you can see where you have got work already incorporated and where we can fit some things in. It is entirely natural during the life of a scrutiny review that we feel that it's appropriate to hold additional meetings. But what we would ask members is that when we look to hold additional meetings, to make sure that you can do justice to the scrutiny review and deliver a sound report based upon evidence that you've been able to examine and reflect upon, that any meeting is held at a time where it's meaningful and that we've got good content for you to explore. So what we don't want to do at the moment is just to give you series of dates, but to understand that we may need to be flexible in putting dates in as and when we feel it's appropriate, to make sure that the timetable flows well and that you do get the opportunity to explore the subjects with the relevant officers and with the evidence. What we do with scrutiny reviews, which is a little bit unusual compared to other committee work, is that we do share information with members outside the agenda forum. So where we find information that is useful to members to understand a particular topic or an element of a topic, we will send links or copies of documentation for members to be able to read and reflect upon. Because one of the things that you're going to be bored of hearing me say, and I'll be quite honest about it, this is your scrutiny review. This is not your officer's scrutiny review, it is yours. So unlike a lot of committees, it is down to you to do the legwork, but also to give us direction as to what you want to look at. We will do research and provide you with information that we find, but these committees are quite unusual, that the members are very proactive in examining, providing and sharing content with the committee. So we, as your lead officers for the scrutiny review, we would be more than happy to receive an email to say, oh, read this in X publication or X newspaper, or this piece of research has been made available. Could you share with the committee? We are more than happy to look at that as long as it's relevant to the scrutiny review. So just to give you a word of caution, this is not going to be officer-led, this will be member-led, but obviously we take the direction from you as to what resources, what you want to see, and then we do the arrangements for you as well. So you've got terms of reference, you've got the timetable, you've had your first of your lectures from me about this being your scrutiny review, and I do apologise because I will keep bringing you back to that, and I will keep bringing you back to your terms of reference. It is only natural when you start examining a subject that your interest will prick in a certain direction, and there's always a natural line of inquiry to think, oh, actually that's quite an interesting thing to follow up. But if it's not linked to the review or the terms of reference, I would ask why it may be very interesting that we use the time productively and focus on the partnership element of enforcement. So that is a quick lecture, and I do apologise, members. It's not for me to tell you off, but we have found over the years, in giving these reminders to members are more engaged and feel that they own the scrutiny review, because that's what we want you to do, is to own this scrutiny review, because there's a report that is produced at the end that goes to the cabinet with recommendations in, and they need to be evidence-based. You have to believe in your recommendations. So that's why I will be I suppose the gatekeeper for you, to make sure that you stay on track within the terms of reference. But what you choose to explore is down to yourselves. So if I can just take you back into the report, if I may. We have set out the arrangements in which we can work with partners, and that's set out, so I do apologise, on pages 9 over to 10, and that's to what we refer to a joint committee, using the NEP as an example, delegations for another local authority, enforcement alongside another authority or agency, or working under statute. So that's roughly the 4 frameworks in which we undertake enforcement action. We've also set out a list of partners that we have worked with on enforcement through the variety of functions and services of the council. And I've also set out what enforcement powers actually mean, because enforcement has a depending on what subject you're looking at, enforcement can be expressed in two ways: as a compliance or as an enforcement matter. And there is a discrete distinction, and this is where it becomes more relevant to licensing than other subjects, because there's certain things that we do in licensing that's a compliance enforcement function, or an enforcement function when somebody's failing to comply with a legal requirement and the activity is unlawful. So we've tried to give members a flavour of where enforcement can be within the organisation in those subjects. The two broad camps of which we define enforcement, and the activities that can fall in the term of enforcement. There's an assumption that enforcement is simply just direct action, and in fairness to a lot of individuals, that is the only time where they have seen enforcement powers. But as you can see from the list that we've got in paragraph 4.7, and it's not an exhaustive list, looking through it myself today, I thought a few more matters, but you can see that enforcement action takes everything from administrative penalties all the way through to warrants from the magistrates court, forfeiture, informal action. So when we talk about enforcement, it is that broad umbrella of actions that we would have regard to, and it may not be a most immediate concept of enforcement when you look at some of our services. So members are probably more familiar with the planning enforcement because the name's in the title, and it's something that is probably brought to your doors as ward members on a frequent basis, that somebody's either planning done a development without consent, or they've built a building contrary to their planning consent. But another area can be things like the enforcement of non-payment of council tax and non-domestic rates. So depending on what subject we're looking at, depends what enforcement means. And I think it's important for members to understand that the one term for one subject is not the same term for another subject that we're looking at. And just because it's not direction, because we're not prosecuting somebody or taking somebody to court, doesn't mean those other steps that are available are not part of the enforcement toolkit. So it's important for members to understand around the, the areas which we can take enforcement and what that enforcement action may look like, particularly when we work with partnerships. So for an example is the NEP. The NEP is the off-street, non-street parking enforcement. They would issue penalty charge notices in accordance with the traffic order, but we wouldn't prosecute. So, but they're all tools of enforcement. At that point, Chairman, if I just pause and take any questions from members on anything that I've mentioned so far. Members are happy with the information I've provided so far? That's lovely, thank you very much. So what we've given you is a very high level introduction into enforcement, and what we now need to hear from members is like, where do you want to go this scrutiny review? What subjects do you want to look at? What areas do you want to look at? Do you want to go, sorry, Councillor Pritchard's just put something on chat function.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't really want to interrupt you there, Emma, while you were in your flow, but I actually wanted to sort of return to Mary's earlier question, which I think was an important one, which was around, what sort of impact in terms of enforcement are we looking to review as a group? And as members, we might all have different views about that. There's the type that impacts individuals or a small group of people, and there's those issues that impact the wider group of people in an area of our district, or the whole district maybe. And I think that might help channel our efforts a little bit if we consider whether as a group we want to look at things that affect a smaller number of people or a larger number of people. My view personally is that we should, given we're all councillors that are quite sizable wards with reasonable populations, that we ought to think about things that impact a larger number of people, but that might not necessarily be that's something that the rest of the members think. So I just thought I'd put that out there, see if that kicked off a debate around sort of narrowing in our efforts a little.
Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. Yes, I tend to agree with that. I think we have to look at areas that have the greatest impact for the authority. As you say, there are lots of enforcements that might affect next door neighbours or 2 or 3 people, but and bearing in mind that we are taking regard for officers' time too, I think it needs to be something that we're going to get good value out of as a scrutiny review.
Chairman, could I ask, as a foundation to making sure that members have all got similar knowledge, can I pose a question to members that, you know, do they understand where our enforcement officers sit within the organisation? You know, is there a view that there's an enforcement team or individual teams, or how those officers work together across the authority? Because obviously you can have partnership working between 2 departments, etc. But could I just I can understand where members may want to take this. Do members know where your enforcement officers sit within services, etc.?
No, I don't.
Councillor Courtauld, please go on.
Sorry, Mary. I don't know where the enforcement officers sit, or indeed how the whole thing works.
I'm unclear on some of that too, so I think that might be a useful starting point to actually get some more information on how that works within the various departments of the authority.
So you would ask us to explore sort of as a part of the information
so we get a broad outline, perhaps, to start with.
So if we can prepare a paper which sets out where our enforcement officers are, whether they are standalone officers or they're a team, etc., and whether we have an enforcement officer, because there's some authorities that have an enforcement team and everything goes through that channel regardless what service it comes from, and then there's others who have individual officers who have an enforcement element within their roles. I think it would be quite surprising for members to see which services have officers with an enforcement element within their role or day-to-day function.
And would it be something that could be easily set out in text for us? The powers they have, the enforcement, or is that too broader?
Well, I would like to think that any of our enforcement officers are able to put their hand quite quickly on the powers that they are discharging on behalf of the organisation.
Okay.
So it's something that we should be able to pull together quite easily, in giving members an idea of where our enforcement officers are, and then sort of where they sit, just so you know which services are talking to others in terms of enforcement. Is there anything else as part of a foundation knowledge that members would want?
Councillor Hensman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think going back to what Emma's already outlined, in our authority, it depends on where you're looking, depends on what the word enforcement means. So you have things like, planning, environmental health, so whether it's noise, or you have street scene enforcement who are doing your littering and so on. So it's perhaps where on here we've got the 4 arrangements with the partnerships, what each of those means, because one I think of with NEP, for example, that's our responsibility, but we've chosen to combine our efforts with Colchester. So they do it on behalf of the northern authorities, and then I think Chelmsford's got the equivalent of the southern in Essex. And it's because enforcement is different depending on which department you go to. So, for example, where you have a noise complaint or dust or something like that, they have to catch them in the act. Where if it's littering and you've got evidence, well, they can go back and do that later. So there's different ways of working it as well. It'll be useful to learn how I know they've got powers and so on, and they can put their hands on it, but it's how they do it. So if we understand what they're up against, then it probably makes it easier to understand what enforcement means in the relevant term, but also how they do it and why they do it that way, because it is different across every department. Thank you.
And that is something that we've actually set out in the report, because broadly all district and borough councils have the same enforcement powers. We will work within the same legislation, but the priorities for that respective authority will determine how they choose to exercise those powers, or to choose to exercise them at all, because the majority of enforcement powers are discretional. So it would pretty much come down to the will of the organisation as to what resources they can put into a certain area. And it may be that there's a peak trough response, but certainly that's something that we can probably look together, but particularly when through the lens of partnership. Chairman, we've got Councillor Mrs. Pell.
Mrs. Pell, I see, yes, would like to speak. Councillor Mrs. Pell.
I think on a personal basis, the department that I've used for enforcement more than anything is environmental health. And also our environmental health officers are TV stars. They form part of a television programme that comes on quite frequently. I think it's called The Enforcers or something. And it was quite enlightening, some of the things that they actually do, that you probably wouldn't have thought that they did. But I think that is a good step, because most people seem to go to that department more than anything else because it's more general.
I would say the Environmental Services Department is the biggest department with more enforcement powers, because they work with a number of pieces of legislation, and that's probably where we've probably got some more of the partnership workings as well, because environmental health officers will work alongside, as we said earlier in our conversation, with social services if there's a particular mental health issue that's causing someone to live in a set of circumstances, and then that will then dictate what enforcement action we may take with those individuals. Also with the environmental the environmental protection notices that get served, you know, we may be working with other partners, particularly if it's like a cross-boundary issue, you know, if it's a large site, you know, if it's an odour issue, we could be working with the water authorities, if it's, you know, depending on what the sources are, etc., and the environmental agencies, etc. So there, within environmental health, there's another huge umbrella which we can explore that do work with partners. So we can start to earmark that as one of the service areas for examination.
Everybody agreed on that one? Yeah, I think that's a useful one. Councillor Pritchard, did I see you indicate earlier?
I was mumbling to myself saying, yes, that's a good one. But
oh, right, sorry.
I think the other one, returning to my point about one that covers the wider district, we are going to see an impact on council tax income off the back of the financial pressures brought about by the current situation we find ourselves in as a country and as a world. And obviously we have to take some empathetic view on that on occasion, because of course people might have lost income through, you know, redundancy or what have you. But obviously it could potentially impact the council's funding, and also the funding of the parish councils, and obviously we collect on behalf of the county council as well. So that might be something we want to put in scope, but with a view to how we build empathy in from the COVID side. That might already be something that exists. I work in the financial services sector, and we have to be very careful about how we enforce non-payment, say, due to COVID reasons. So it might be something that's already built into what the council do. I don't know.
Okay. Certainly with our partners on council tax, whilst not being viewed as a traditional partner, it is the court service, because that's where a lot of the initiated enforcement action would arise. And also then we've got collection agencies like the bailiffs that we work with. So there are some probably non-traditional partnerships there that can be explored, particularly as they do work directly on our instructions. So that's something that it's probably not a partnership that leaps to mind, but certainly the court service, when we first went into the lockdown, actually curtailed the types of hearings that it would deal with and how it would issue proceedings. So there is probably some elements to explore with that, particularly around whether the effective use of enforcement and the timeliness of that can also be looked at.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Emma, because I'm aware that court services have obviously been badly affected by the current situation, and obviously it might be that throwing additional work into a pot that's already overflowing might not be a course of action we want to take. Now, that's touching on the actual enforcement itself, I guess, so that's not where we want to go, but it's just an interesting thing to bear in mind.
It certainly can be examined how we work with the partnerships on enforcement for council tax and other debt recovery. It's not a traditional area that people generally think of as an enforcement action, but it is a service and function of the authority that does have those powers. There's a whole set of regulations for council tax recovery, which our officers are trained in when they utilise those. So there is some day-to-day partnership working through our officers in the recovery service for collection of non-payment. So a big part of the scrutiny review is about obtaining knowledge about how the authority works. So even if you explore a subject and don't actually come out with a proactive recommendation, the recommendation may be, actually, we've explored it, it appears to work, and there's nothing for us to be working on. But who knows what you're going to examine and find out through looking at these subjects through the lens of partnership. So that's certainly something that we can get information for members. We've certainly got lead officers contacts in both the services, environmental health and council tax, to explore those subjects.
Anybody else? Any input on that? Perhaps I can come in on one here. Another aspect is probably on the operations side, where we have large fly tips, which are obviously costly to the authority to clear and recover. And I know we have enforcement on it. If we could look at perhaps how that is done, is there a pattern that because they fly tip and there is enforcement involved and a fine, is the fine sufficient to stop them doing it again? What I'm trying to say is it cheaper for that? Obviously, they haven't got a waste carrier's license, presumably, that the fine is not enough to stop them doing it again.
I think we'd have to caution a little bit, because obviously we need to look at it through the partnership side. So if you're looking to fly tipping, maybe what we'd be looking at is sort of fly tipping, or maybe on the borders where we've got intelligence from one area, say that we've got a known fly tipper in this is where I'm going to disgrace myself not recalling which authorities on our borders, but let's say we've got an operation happening in our Uttlesford boundaries, and then we've got somebody who is then moving into the Braintree district, because we've got those lovely neat little lanes that connect the two districts. So how do our fly tipping enforcement officers share that information to ensure to achieve enforcement and to prosecute? I think that's where we would look at it, rather than looking at the whether the fines that are available through the court procedures are appropriate to stop these individuals. So I'd bring it back to looking at the lens of partnership working, but certainly with operations, fly tipping and things like working with neighbouring authorities or the Environment Agency. I can recall instances where we've had discussions with the Environment Agency where there's been large fly tips that have potentially impacted upon watercourses and things like that. So there's certainly elements that can be explored through the partnership working lens, rather than focusing on the whether the fines themselves are appropriate to stop people taking that kind of activity.
Reoffending, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any further? Have we got enough perhaps to be making a start?
Certainly, members. We've got 3 areas. So environmental health, that is quite a large area. So we'll make some inquiries to see how what information can, because obviously we want to be meaningful. So it may be that we come back to members, say within the service, could we have a direction to look on this aspect or another aspect. Certainly, we're examining, working with our partners on recovery of council tax, etc., and then working with partners on operations with a view to prevent or deter and enforce on fly tipping, on boundary issues, the council boundary issues. That gives us some work to start with. Obviously, if members come across another subject, members in other scrutiny reviews have shared articles, and then that have happened in other areas, and said, is this a problem for us? And if we've been able to look at it within the context of our review as supporting evidence, then we can certainly look at that. But certainly those 3 subjects will give us some meat to work with, and to start sorting out lead officers and potential witnesses. I mean, obviously, when we talk about witnesses, there are officers, and where we have got appropriate contacts in other partnership organisations, we will invite them to come forward to bring their experience, knowledge, and to answer your questions regarding the partnership working. Chairman, I've noticed Councillor
Sandham, I see, would like to speak. Councillor Sandham.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just one other that I think would be useful is the one I mentioned earlier about the landscaping team and what partnerships they've got, and whether there's potential for more partnerships.
So the landscaping team itself is not, it doesn't have a wide enforcement function, but certainly that's something that you can explore in terms of what powers they do have in terms of enforcement, and whether they do work with any partners, etc. So particularly around your concerns around the destruction of hedgerows and those tree species that are protected by TPOs, etc. So
yeah, and maybe getting more TPOs on, or I don't.
Well, yeah. what we wouldn't be looking at would be in scrutiny review as to the criteria on what tree would qualify for protection under the TPO. It's how we would work with our partners to further the protections with hedgerows and trees that we.
Yeah, because if there's a sort of capacity issue in terms of how big the team is, whether there could be partners that could help with that issue.
But that's certainly something that could be explored. It may, if I just caveat members that there may be some service areas that will provide you with more information than other service areas, but certainly that's something that we could look at. So.
Councillor Sandham, I see Councillor Hensman would like to speak.
Yes, please, Chair. Going back to partnership working, Emma's made a couple of interesting points, namely with neighbouring authorities, and it's where could we look at our own partnership within ourselves? So if enforcement in one area is short and has got a lot of work on, and another area may have spare capacity, that they can help each other out. Because I see that we don't have an enforcement team per se. I guess it may come down to the relevant legislation, but also it's when you work with another team from another authority and they have a different way of working. So therefore, you need to have officers on a level playing field, if you see what I mean.
Certainly the barriers to partnership working would examine, the different working arrangements and priorities for neighbour authorities, because that may be one of the questions we put to, let's say, like with environmental, say, do you work in partnership with anybody? And they may come back to say, no, actually, because we have these issues. So the absence of a partnership is also worthwhile exploring, because you may get told, well, actually, we did approach authority to see if we could look at this for a partnership work on a long-term basis, but actually the appetite from the other authority was not sufficient to take it forward, or they didn't have the resources, or there wasn't the, you have some authorities who don't want to do partnership working because they see it as a vulnerability rather than seeing it as a strength. So it's certainly something that we can put to the enforcement officers that we were going to look at as to say, do you work in partnership? If not, why not? And that's when we can start generating that information as to why they don't do partnership working, because that fits within the terms of reference for the review, because it may be that we haven't had the right conversations at the right level on partnership working for enforcement with neighbouring authorities or other agencies.
It's not just about working generally with other authorities. I was also meaning where there is a particular case. So, for example, your road fly tipper that's gone from Uppersford into Braintree and vice versa. We would then have to work with both teams to put a joint case together.
Yep.
So what I was meaning there was you have now a live case, not necessarily farming the work out to other authorities and working together as a team that way. It's more on the joint operations where the team structures are different.
We can certainly put that question to the officers to say, how do you work in partnership? Is it under a formal arrangement? Is it under a joint operation approach? Because that's something that we did touch upon in the report. And I'm aware that we, through my time here at the authority, we have had cross-border issues in a number of subjects where we've hoped to work with a neighbouring authority and we haven't been able to achieve that for a variety of reasons. So we've had to then take the matter on our own, and the potential may have been that we didn't get a greater outcome to the one that we did achieve. So that's certainly some of the questions we can put to our licensing officers, our enforcement officers around sort of partnership working and what they see as bars to work in partnership with them as well.
Okay, I think probably we've got enough to be going on with tonight. Emma?
Yes, so members, I've got environmental health, and at the moment we're looking at the environmental health in its broadest sense, so we may come back to narrow that down depending on the information we get. Council tax, debt recovery, operations, cross-border review to cross-border working, etc. Landscaping, partnership working for enforcement and protection, and then the general inquiries to our enforcement officers and to establish where our enforcement officers are and the powers that they've got and how they discharge those. Are members happy with that as a starting point?
Good, that's great. So we've agreed the terms of reference already. We've noted the future work programme for 2021-22 as set out in the report. We don't need to make any further dates at this point, Emma.
I think what we'll do, Chairman, with members, Commission, is that we'll start putting the feelers out to get this information, and then we'll initially speak to yourself as Chair and Vice Chair about future dates, and then we'll talk to the rest of the committee, because obviously I'm very mindful that members' time is valuable. You don't just sit on this committee, you all sit on a variety of committees, and we're coming into a quite busy part of the timetable for members. So if I may see the volume of work that comes back into us, and then sort of discuss additional meetings, and we'll probably do main of that communication through email, if I may.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Yes. So in terms of steps we wish to take, we ask officers to progress the suggestions received today and to report back to myself and the Vice Chairman. This will be shared with the rest of the committee in due course. Everybody happy with that? Good. So thank you, members. The recommendations have been agreed. Okay. So I think that concludes the meeting for the business for this evening. So I will close the meeting of the Partnership Development Group at 8:10. Thank you, members, for your attendance this evening, and to those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. I'll now hand over to the meeting facilitator. Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before I ask the webcaster to terminate the broadcast, I would like to remind you that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connection to the meeting in the event of a legal challenge to this new way of holding meetings. Can the webcaster please confirm that the broadcast has ceased?